The rain wasn't just falling, it was attacking. It drummed against the roof of my rusted-out 2014 sedan like 1,000 tiny hammers, each one reminding me of the headache throbbing behind my eyes. I, Elena Vance, was a ghost of a human being. My hands, stained with the faint scent of graphite and expensive drafting vellum, gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were white. I had just spent 48 hours in a fluorescent-lit hellscape at Sterling and Associates Architecture, fueled by nothing but lukewarm vending machine coffee and the desperate hope of a promotion. I needed that senior associate title. I needed the raise. Why? Because Julian's consulting firm was apparently between contracts for the third year in a row, and Victoria's taste in vintage Chardonnay wasn't getting any cheaper. As I turned onto the long, winding driveway of the Blackwood estate, the gravel crunched under my tires like breaking bones. Usually, this house was a beacon of arrogance. Victoria loved to keep the exterior flooded with light, a middle finger to the neighbors whose properties weren't quite as sprawling. But tonight, it was a void. The house loomed out of the mist like a Victorian monster, its windows like dark, hollow eye sockets. I pulled to a stop, the engine of my car shuddering before finally dying with a pathetic wheeze. I sat there for a second, listening to the rain. "Julian?" I whispered to the empty car. "Please tell me you remembered to pay the electric bill." I stepped out, and the humid New York air clung to my skin like a wet wool blanket. My heels sank into the mud. I didn't care. I fumbled in my trench coat pocket for my keys, the metal cold and biting. I felt a strange prickle on the back of my neck. A sense that the house wasn't just dark, it was watching. I pushed the heavy oak door open. It didn't just creak, it groaned. "Julian! I'm home! The project is submitted!" My voice bounced off the marble floors of the foyer and came back to me, lonely and unanswered. The smell hit me next. It wasn't the smell of Julian's expensive sandalwood cologne or Victoria's overpowering floral perfume. It was the smell of stagnant air, dust. The faint metallic tang of a house that had been shut tight while the world outside breathed. I reached for the light switch. Nothing. I flipped it again. Click, click. Click, click. "Great," I muttered, my exhaustion turning into a slow boiling resentment. "Just great." I pulled my phone out, 5% battery. The low power warning flashed at me like a mocking eye. I turned on the flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness of the foyer. It landed on a mahogany side table where a half-eaten ham sandwich was curled at the edges, green mold beginning to fuzz over the crust. And then I saw the note. It was pinned to the gilded mirror with a silver letter opener. Julian's favorite toy. I pulled it free, the paper crisp and expensive. "Elena," it began. "No honey. No welcome home. Just Elena." The atmosphere here has become quite drab. Mother and I decided a change of scenery was necessary for our mental health. "We've headed to the coast. Don't bother calling. The signal is atrocious and we'd prefer the peace. Oh, and do be a dear and check on Aunt Martha. She's been in one of her moods lately. Make sure she doesn't make a mess of the attic room. See you in a few weeks. Maybe." The paper crumpled in my hand before I even realized I was squeezing it. A few weeks? They had left. They had left me with a mounting pile of debt, a dark house, and Martha. My heart hammered against my ribs. Martha was 92 years old. She had advanced dementia, or so they said. She was Julian's great aunt, the penniless ward they took in out of charity. If they had left this morning, and the power was out. "Martha!" I screamed, dropping my bags right there on the mud-tracked marble. The stairs felt like they were growing as I climbed. The Blackwood mansion was 3 stories of wasted space, and Martha's room was at the very top. The servants' quarters that Victoria had deemed good enough for someone who doesn't know where she is. My phone light flickered. 3%. "Please, please, please," I whispered, my breath hitching in my chest. The air grew colder as I reached the third floor. The heating vents up here had been closed off years ago to save on utilities. I reached the door to the attic room. It was heavy, scarred wood. I pushed it open, and the smell of lavender and something bitter hit me. Martha was a small shadow on a narrow cot. She looked like a crumpled tissue, her white hair fanned out against a thin, yellowed pillow. She wasn't moving. "Martha?" I knelt beside her, my knees hitting the hardwood with a dull thud. I reached out and touched her hand. I let out a sob. It was like touching a piece of refrigerated marble. "No, no, no, no. Martha, wake up. It's Elena. I'm here." I didn't think. I acted. I ran back down to the kitchen, my phone light finally dying, leaving me in total, oppressive blackness. I felt my way to the pantry, grabbing a bottle of water and a clean rag. I used my lighter, a small Zippo I kept for stress, to guide me back up. For the next 3 hours, I was a woman possessed. I wrapped Martha in my own wool coat. I rubbed her hands to get the circulation moving. I soaked the rag and squeezed drops of water into her mouth, watching with bated breath until her throat finally, miraculously, worked. She swallowed. "That's it," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "That's it, Martha. I've got you. They're gone. But I'm here." I felt a surge of pure, unadulterated hate for Julian. How could he? He was her blood. He had grown up on her stories, and he had left her to freeze in the dark while he went to clear his head at the coast. I leaned my head against the edge of the cot, my body finally surrendering to the 2 days of no sleep. I didn't mean to close my eyes. I just meant to rest them for a second. I was jolted awake by a sound. Thrum. It was low, a mechanical hum. I looked around, confused. Was the power back on? No. The room was still dark. But then, I felt it. A hand. It wasn't a weak, shaking hand. It was a hand that gripped my shoulder with the strength of a vice. I looked up. Martha was sitting up. Her back was as straight as a ruler. The cloudy look in her eyes, that vacant 1,000-yard stare that Julian always joked about, was gone. In its place was a sharp, piercing blue that felt like it was reading my very soul. "Elena Vance," she said. Her voice wasn't the high-pitched warble of a sick woman. It was a rich, authoritative alto. It was the voice of a woman who owned the room. "Martha? You're okay? I thought you were—" "I was waiting, Elena," Martha said. She looked at the door, her eyes narrowing. "I was waiting to see if there was a single soul in this family worth saving. It turns out, the only one worth a damn isn't even a Blackwood by blood." She swung her legs over the side of the bed. She didn't need my help. She stood up, her small frame suddenly feeling 10 feet tall. "Lock the door, child," she commanded. "And don't look so surprised. We have a very long night ahead of us, and I have a great deal of consulting to do." I did as she said. My brain was misfiring, trying to reconcile the demented Aunt Martha with this iron matriarch standing before me. I turned the lock, the click echoing like a gunshot. "Julian said you couldn't even feed yourself," I stammered. "Julian," Martha spat the name like it was poison, "is a man who couldn't find his own ego in a room full of mirrors. He saw what he wanted to see. He wanted me to be a senile old woman so he could feel superior while he waited for my pittance to fall into his lap." She walked over to the old plastic dresser, the one Victoria had bought at a garage sale for $10. She didn't open a drawer. Instead, she pressed a sequence of knots on the side of the wood. Hiss. The top of the dresser slid back, revealing not clothes, but a glowing interface. A sleek, black tablet rose from the hidden compartment. Martha picked it up, her fingers moving with a dexterity that made my own young hands feel clumsy. "The power isn't out, Elena," she said, looking at the screen. "I cut the main line to the house from my private server. I wanted to see if Julian would stay to fix it. He didn't. He took the first excuse to run to his mistress." "His mistress?" The word felt like a physical blow to my stomach. Martha looked at me, her expression softening for a brief second. "Chloe." your best friend. They've been together for 18 months, Elena. Using your overtime money to pay for hotel rooms in the city. I have the receipts. I have the GPS logs, and I have the video. She tapped a button on the tablet, and a hidden projector in the ceiling hummed to life. A crystal-clear image appeared on the far wall. It was Julian's office. I watched, frozen, as the man I had married laughed with a woman I had shared my deepest secrets with. "She's so easy to play," Chloe's voice came through the speakers, crisp and clear. "She actually thinks she's building a future for you two. Meanwhile, we're building ours." "She's a workhorse, Chloe," Julian replied, pouring a glass of bourbon. "And workhorses eventually get sent to the glue factory. Once Martha dies and the trust settles, Elena gets the divorce papers and a one-way ticket back to her parents' house. She won't have a cent to her name." I felt a coldness wash over me. It wasn't the cold of the attic, it was the cold of a heart turning to stone. I looked at Martha. "Who are you?" I asked. "I am the woman who built the Sterling shipping empire while your husband's grandfather was still learning how to tie his shoes," Martha said, her voice dropping an octave. "I am the majority shareholder of every bank Julian owes money to. And tonight, Elena, tonight you and I are going to perform a hostile takeover of his life." The blue light from the tablet reflected in Martha's eyes, making them look like two chips of ancient glacier ice. I stood there, shivering in my damp clothes, feeling the absolute absurdity of the situation. 10 minutes ago, I was mourning a dying woman. Now I was standing in a high-tech bunker hidden inside a rotting Victorian attic, being told that my husband was a two-bit thief and a philanderer. "Sterling Shipping," I whispered, the name tasting like copper in my mouth. Julian always said he was the glue that held the logistics department together. He said the board of directors personally called him for advice. Martha let out a sound that was half laugh, half growl. "Julian couldn't glue two pieces of construction paper together without getting his fingers stuck. He's a middle manager, Elena, a glorified paper pusher who was only given a desk because I told the CEO, a man who owes me his entire career, to keep an eye on him. I wanted to see if the boy had a spark. Instead, I found a gutter rat." She tapped the screen, and the wall monitors flickered to life. These weren't just security cameras, they were data feeds. I saw stock tickers, shipping manifests, and a live GPS map of the North Atlantic. "Look at this," Martha commanded, pointing to a series of red highlighted lines on a spreadsheet. "This is Julian's consulting work. He's been rerouting Sterling containers through a shell company in Delaware. He thinks he's being subtle, skimming a few thousand here, a few thousand there, but he's greedy. He started dipping into the pension funds last month. That was his final mistake. You don't steal from the men and women who haul the freight, Elena. Not on my watch." I stared at the numbers. They were dizzying. Thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions. "He told me we were broke. He told me the reason we couldn't afford a new heater for your room was because the firm was restructuring. He used that money to buy a beach house in the Hamptons, Elena," Martha said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. "A house that is currently registered in Chloe's name. He's been funneling your hard-earned salary into the maintenance of a property he plans to move into the day I'm buried." The room seemed to spin. I grabbed the edge of the dresser to steady myself. The betrayal wasn't just romantic, it was financial warfare. He had turned me into a slave for his own luxury. "Why tell me now?" I asked. "Why wait until they left?" Martha looked at me, and for the first time I saw a flicker of something human in her gaze. Empathy. "Because I needed to know if you were a victim or an accomplice, Elena. I've lived 92 years. I've seen families tear each other apart for a silver spoon. If you had walked into this room tonight and ignored me, if you had just gone to bed and let me suffer, I would have burned this house down with all of you in it. But you didn't. You fed me. You cried for me. You are the daughter I never had, and the leader this company actually needs." She straightened her silk blouse, which she had pulled from a hidden compartment. "Now, We have exactly 48 hours before they return. We have a lot of work to do, and I don't plan on sleeping. Do you? No, I said, my voice finally finding its steel. I'm wide awake. We spent the rest of the night in that glowing room. Martha showed me everything. It was like a crash course in corporate espionage and the utter depravity of the Blackwood ego. Listen to this one, Martha said, opening an audio file from 3 weeks ago. The sound of clinking glasses filled the room. It was the Sunday brunch Victoria insisted on every week. I remembered that day. I had spent 6 hours in the kitchen making a soufflé that Julian told me was a bit rubbery. Victoria: Julian, darling, the lawyer says the incapacity papers are ready. We just need her to sign the power of attorney. Once we have that, we can move her to that facility in New Jersey, the one with the unfortunate reputation. Julian: She won't sign, Mother. Even in her fog, she's stubborn as a mule. But it doesn't matter. The doctor I hired, Dr. Aris, he's ready to certify her as non-compos mentis. We just need a few more weeks of the special tea. Victoria: And Elena? She's starting to ask questions about the bank statements. Julian, laughing: Elena? I told her it was a technical glitch at the bank. She's so desperate for me to love her that she'll believe anything I say. I'll just take her out for a cheap dinner and buy her some grocery store flowers. That'll keep her quiet while we finish the transfer. I sat in the dark, listening to my husband describe me as a desperate fool, the man I had supported through depression, the man whose feet I had rubbed when he complained about his stressful day. He was laughing at my love. He saw it as a weakness, a tool to be used. The special tea, I whispered. That's why she was so weak when I got home. Digitalis, Martha said. In small, consistent doses, it causes confusion, weakness, and eventually, cardiac arrest. Julian's been slipping it into my water for months. He thought I was too far gone to notice the bitter taste. But I grew up in the Depression, Elena. I can taste poison a mile away. She showed me another video. This one was from the hidden camera in Victoria's bedroom. My mother-in-law was standing in front of her vanity, draped in a diamond necklace I had never seen before. Victoria, to herself in the mirror. Soon, Victoria. Soon you won't have to live in this drafty museum with that boring girl. We'll have the penthouse, we'll have the yacht, and we'll never have to look at a budget again. She then picked up a photo of me from her nightstand, a photo from my wedding day, and she slowly, methodically, used a pair of sewing scissors to cut my face out of the frame. I felt a chill run down my spine. This wasn't just greed. This was malice. They didn't just want the money. They wanted to erase me. They think they are the hunters, Martha said, closing the laptop with a definitive snap. But they've forgotten that I am the one who built the woods they're playing in. Elena, call this number. She handed me a gold-embossed business card. It said, Arthur Vance, Strategic Legal Defense. He's my personal fixer, Martha said. Tell him the Eagle is ready to fly, and tell him to bring the heavy hitters. We're going to need a moving crew, a design team, and a very large shredder. At exactly 6 in the morning, the silence of the Blackwood estate was broken by the sound of heavy engines. I watched from the second-story window as 3 unmarked black vans and a large white moving truck pulled into the driveway. A man stepped out of the lead van. He was wearing a charcoal suit that looked like it had been molded onto his frame. He moved with a quiet, lethal grace. This was Arthur Vance. I met him at the door. Mrs. Vance? He asked, his voice a smooth, professional baritone. Elena, I corrected. I don't think I'll be a Mrs. for much longer. Understandable, Arthur said, giving me a curt, respectful nod. The chairwoman briefed me on the way over. We have the temporary restraining orders, the eviction notices, and the forensic accountants are already diving into the Delaware Shell Company. Where is she? Top floor, I said. And Arthur? She's not what I expected. Arthur actually smiled, a small knowing glint in his eyes. The chairwoman hasn't been what anyone expected since 1955. Let's get to work. What followed was the most efficient display of power I had ever witnessed. Within an hour, 20 men and women were swarming the house. They weren't just cleaning, they were performing a surgical extraction of every trace of Julian and Victoria. "The furniture goes in the dumpster," Martha commanded, standing on the landing of the grand staircase like a general. "That tacky velvet sofa Victoria bought with the foundation money? Shred it. Those fake Renaissance paintings in the hallway? Burn them. I want this house returned to its original sterling glory." I watched as a team of interior designers, who had been flown in on a private jet, began unrolling rugs that were so thick they muffled the sound of footsteps. They replaced the dusty, floral curtains with heavy midnight blue silk. They polished the mahogany until it shone like a mirror. But the most important work was happening in Julian's office. "We found the ledger," one of the accountants shouted. He kept a physical backup of the Delaware transfers. He's been bragging about it in his diary. "His diary?" I asked, incredulous. "Julian always was a narcissist," Martha said, walking into the office and picking up a leather-bound book. "He wanted to make sure that when he was famous, everyone would know how smart he was. He's written down every date, every amount, and every person he bribed at the shipping docks." She handed the book to Arthur. "This is the smoking gun. Hand this to the feds. I want him arrested the moment his foot touches the property." "And Victoria?" I asked. "Oh, Victoria has a separate fate," Martha said, her eyes flashing. "I've been looking into the Victoria Blackwood Social Foundation. It turns out she's been using it to launder money for a high-end gambling ring in Atlantic City. The IRS is going to have a field day with her." By noon, the house was unrecognizable. It was no longer the Blackwood mansion. It was the Sterling estate. It felt heavy. It felt powerful. It felt just. Martha turned to me. She was holding a small velvet box. "Elena, you've been wearing that silver necklace for 7 years. Julian told you it was a family heirloom, didn't he?" "Yes," I said, touching the small pendant. "He said it belonged to his grandmother." "It's costume jewelry, Elena," Martha said, her voice gentle. "He bought it at a gift shop in the airport. He sold the real heirloom, a 10-carat sapphire, to pay off a gambling debt 3 years ago." She opened the box. Inside was a necklace of such brilliance it seemed to hold the sunlight, a deep blue sapphire surrounded by diamonds. "This belonged to my mother," Martha said. "The real sterling matriarch. I want you to wear it, not as a wife, but as the new executive vice president of Sterling Shipping." I looked at the gems, then at Martha. "I'm an architect, Martha. I don't know the first thing about shipping lanes." "You built a career while being sabotaged by your own family," Martha said, clasping the necklace around my neck. "You managed the logistics of this entire household on a shoestring budget. You are an architect of systems, Elena. And right now, my system needs a heart. Now go get dressed. Our guests will be arriving for dinner shortly." I spent the next hour in the guest suite, which had been transformed into a master bedroom fit for a queen. The stylists Martha had brought in didn't just give me a makeover, they gave me an armor. I wore an emerald green gown that was structured and bold. My hair was swept up into a sleek, professional chignon. My makeup was minimal but sharp. Eyes defined, lips a deep, matte red. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see the woman who had been gaslit for 7 years. I didn't see the woman who apologized for existing. I saw Elena Sterling. I walked down the grand staircase at 6 in the evening. The house was silent, save for the ticking of a grandfather clock that had been restored to perfect time. Martha was waiting at the bottom, looking regal in a silver lace dress. "You look like a woman who is about to take back what's hers," she whispered. "I am," I said. Just then, the sound of a car engine echoed through the foyer. It was Julian's SUV. He was home. "Places," Martha said, her voice dropping into a chillingly calm tone. She sat back in her red velvet throne in the center of the foyer. I stepped into the shadows of the library, my heart racing, but not with fear. With the cold, calculated thrill of the hunt. The front door burst open. Julian and Victoria walked in like they owned the world. They were carrying bags from Tiffany's and Gucci, laughing about a joke Julian had told in the car. "God, I'm parched!" Victoria shouted, dropping her bags on the marble floor, right onto the spot where I had spent 4 hours scrubbing the week before. "Julian, tell that girl to get the wine. I want the 1996 vintage." "Elena, we're home. Get out here," Julian yelled, his voice echoing with that familiar, casual cruelty. He reached for the light switch. The chandelier flared to life. Julian blinked. He looked at the walls. He looked at the floor. He looked at the heavy blue curtains. "What? What the hell?" he stammered. "Who moved the furniture? Victoria, did you hire a decorator behind my back?" "I didn't do anything," Victoria said, her voice rising in a panicked screech. "Julian, look! The sofa! It's gone! My porcelain collection is gone!" And then, their eyes landed on the center of the room. Martha sat there, perfectly still, sipping a cup of tea. She looked at them with the bored expression of someone watching a particularly dull insect. "You're late," Martha said. "The 1996 vintage was corked. I had the staff pour it down the drain." Julian's face went from pale to a deep, mottled purple. "Martha, why are you out of bed? And who the hell gave you permission to touch the furniture?" "This is my house, Julian," Martha said, her voice cutting through his bravado like a razor. "And I don't recall giving you permission to live in it for the last 7 years." Victoria stepped forward, her hands shaking. "Mother, you're confused. You've been sick. The dementia. It's making you forget. This is Julian's house. Your husband left it to him in the will." "My husband left this house to me," Martha corrected, "with a life estate for Julian only if he remained a productive member of the family and didn't, say, try to murder me with digitalis drops." The silence that followed was so heavy it felt like it would crack the floor. Julian's eyes darted to the water pitcher on the side table. He began to sweat. "I don't know what you're talking about," Julian hissed. "You're crazy. Elena, where are you? Get this old woman back to her room before I call the hospital." I stepped out of the library. Julian's jaw actually dropped. He stared at me, at the dress, at the sapphire necklace, at the way I was standing. "Elena?" he whispered. What did you do?" "I didn't do anything, Julian," I said, my voice as cold as a winter morning in the Adirondacks. "I just stopped paying for your life, and I started listening to the tapes." "Tapes?" Victoria gasped. I pulled my phone out and pressed play. "She's a workhorse, Chloe. Once Martha dies and the trust settles, Elena gets the divorce papers." The recording filled the foyer. Julian looked like he was going to vomit. He looked at the stairs, then at the door, realizing he was trapped. "It's a fake!" Julian shouted, his voice cracking. "She's using AI to frame me. I love you, Elena. I was just joking with Chloe. She's nothing." Chloe, who had been standing in the doorway, finally stepped inside. She looked at Julian, then at me, then at the 2 massive bodyguards standing behind Martha. "Actually, Julian," Chloe said, her voice surprisingly sharp, "I think I'm the one who's nothing now, because I'm not going to jail for you." "Chloe?" Julian stared at her. "I spoke to Mr. Vance this morning," Chloe said, looking at me with a flicker of genuine fear. "I gave him the offshore account numbers. I gave him the keys to the Hamptons house. I'm a state witness, Julian. Good luck with the feds." Victoria let out a literal howl of rage and lunged at Chloe, her nails out like claws. But before she could even get close, Arthur Vance stepped out from behind the grand staircase. "That's enough, Mrs. Blackwood," Arthur said. Behind him, 4 men in suits, men with badges pinned to their belts, stepped into the light. "FBI," the lead officer said. "Julian Blackwood, you're being charged with wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit murder. Victoria Blackwood, you're being charged with money laundering and tax evasion. You have the right to remain silent." As the handcuffs were slapped onto Julian's wrists, he looked at me. Not with love, but with a pure, concentrated venom. "You'll never be a Sterling, Elena. You're just a maid in a fancy dress. You're nothing without me." I walked up to him, and for the first time in 7 years, I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, just clarity. "Actually, Julian," I said, "without you, I'm the woman who owns your company, and I'm the woman who's going to make sure you never see the sun without bars in front of it again." I turned to the officer. "Take them away. They're cluttering up my foyer." 3 months later, the Otisville Correctional Facility was a world of gray concrete and the smell of industrial-grade bleach. Julian Blackwood sat on his cot, staring at a small, rusted sink. He was wearing an orange jumpsuit that was 3 sizes too large for his once athletic frame. His cellmate was a man named Big Sal, a former union enforcer who didn't care about Julian's consulting experience. "Hey, princess," Sal grunted, throwing a pile of dirty socks at Julian's head. "It's Tuesday. Tuesday is laundry day. Get to work." Julian looked at the socks, his stomach turning. I don't know how to use the machines." Sal stood up, looming over him like a mountain. "You'll figure it out, or you'll find out how hard this floor is. Your choice." Julian gathered the socks, his fingers trembling. He thought about Elena. He thought about how he used to throw his silk shirts on the floor and wait for her to pick them up. He thought about how he used to complain if she didn't iron his collars perfectly. Now, he was scrubbing socks for a man who would kill him for a pack of cigarettes. Every night, Julian would lie awake, listening to the clanging of the gates and the distant, muffled screams of the other inmates. He would imagine the Blackwood mansion. He would imagine the wine, the food, the silk sheets. And then, he would see the image of Elena on the prison television. She was everywhere now. Elena Sterling Vance, the CEO of the year. The woman who had saved Sterling Shipping from collapse. She looked radiant. She looked powerful. She looked like she had never known a man named Julian Blackwood in her life. "I'll get out," Julian whispered to the dark. "I'll get out, and I'll take it all back." But he knew it was a lie. He had 10 more years. And Victoria? Victoria was in a women's facility in Bedford Hills. She had tried to start a social club in the communal yard. She had tried to order the other women around, telling them that she was a Blackwood of Manhattan. She had ended up with a black eye and a week in solitary. Now, Victoria spent her days in the prison library, trying to write a memoir that no one would ever publish. She was alone. Truly, utterly alone. She had traded her daughter-in-law for a dream of gold, and she had ended up with a plastic tray of mystery meat. 1 year later. The Sterling Social Welfare Foundation was no longer a front for money laundering. It was the most respected nonprofit in the tri-state area. I stood in the center of the newly built Martha Sterling wing of the Metropolitan Hospital. We were opening a wing dedicated to the research of elder abuse and forensic accounting. Martha was beside me, leaning on her silver-topped cane. She didn't look like a woman in her 90s. She looked like a force of nature. "You did good, Elena," Martha whispered as the cameras flashed. "We did good," I said. We had spent the last year purging the Blackwood name from every document we owned. We had rebuilt the company from the ground up, firing the corrupt managers Julian had hired and replacing them with young, hungry talent who actually cared about the work. I had also found my own passion again. I wasn't just an architect of systems. I was designing the new Sterling headquarters, a sustainable glass and steel masterpiece that would overlook the harbor. That night we returned to the estate. The house was full of life. We had hired a staff that was paid fairly and treated with respect. There was no more stale air. The windows were open, letting in the scent of the ocean and the blooming jasmine in the garden. We sat on the back terrace, the same spot where I had once cried over a pile of Julian's unpaid bills. "I have something for you," Martha said, handing me a heavy, leather-bound folder. I opened it. My breath caught in my throat. It was the deed to the estate, but my name wasn't listed as the heir. It was listed as the sole owner. "I'm moving to the penthouse in the city," Martha said, smiling. "I want to be closer to the opera, and I want to be closer to the office so I can annoy you during board meetings." "Martha, I can't take this," I said. "You already have," Martha said, taking my hand. "You took it the night you chose compassion over comfort. You took it the day you refused to be a victim. This isn't a gift, Elena. It's a transition. The empire needs a new matriarch, and I think she's sitting right here." I looked out over the garden, at the lights of the city in the distance. I felt the weight of the sapphire necklace, the warmth of the tea in my hand, and the absolute, unshakable peace in my soul. The story of the empty house was over. The house was full. My heart was full. And for the first time in my life, I was exactly where I was meant to be. The courtroom was silent, the kind of silence that feels heavy, like it's pressing against your eardrums. I sat in the front row, my back straight, wearing a navy blue power suit that made me feel like I could command a fleet of ships, which, technically, I now did. To my left sat Harriet Martha Sterling. She looked regal, her silver cane resting against her knee, her eyes fixed on the man standing at the defense table. Julian looked diminished. The tan from the Hamptons had faded into a sickly, fluorescent-lit gray. He was wearing a cheap, off-the-rack suit his public defender had scrounged up. Beside him, Victoria was weeping into a lace handkerchief, but there was no one left in the gallery to see her performance. Her friends from the garden club were gone. Her allies in the foundation had already signed affidavits against her. The judge, a stern woman with iron gray hair, looked down at the documents provided by Arthur Vance. "Mr. Blackwood," the judge began, her voice echoing through the chamber. "In my 25 years on the bench, I have rarely seen such a calculated display of greed and cruelty. You didn't just embezzle funds from a corporation, you systematically attempted to destroy the very woman who gave you everything, and the evidence of the Digitalis administration. That is not just fraud, that is malice." Julian tried to speak, his voice a shaky, pathetic whisper. "Your Honor, I was under immense pressure, the family legacy. I just wanted to make them proud." "Proud?" Martha's voice rang out, quiet but sharp as a diamond. "Julian, you couldn't even make your own mother proud without stealing from a dying woman's water pitcher." The gavel came down. Crack! "Julian Blackwood, I sentence you to 15 years in a maximum security facility with no possibility of parole for the first 12. Victoria Blackwood, for your role in the money laundering and the neglect of a dependent elder, you are sentenced to 10 years. As the bailiffs moved in to lead them away, Julian turned to me. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. "You think you won, Elena?" he spat, the spittle flying from his lips. "You're just an architect. You'll run that company into the ground in a year. You're nothing without the Blackwood name." I stood up slowly. I walked over to him, the clicking of my heels the only sound in the room. I leaned in, my voice so low only he could hear it. "Julian, the Blackwood name is already gone. I filed the paperwork this morning. The company is now Sterling and Vance Global. And as for being nothing," I smiled, a cold, satisfied expression. "I'm the woman who just bought your prison's textile contract. I'll make sure your jumpsuits are especially itchy." 6 months after the sentencing, the Blackwood estate, now officially renamed the Sterling Sanctuary, had been completely purged of its dark history. We had stripped the wallpaper that Victoria loved. We had replaced the heavy, oppressive rugs. We had opened every single window. The house finally breathed. I was standing in the foyer, watching as a team of movers brought in the final pieces for the Sterling Social Welfare Foundation's new headquarters. We had turned the grand ballroom into a workspace for forensic accountants and advocates who specialized in protecting the elderly from financial predators. Martha walked in from the garden, a bouquet of fresh jasmine in her hand. She looked stronger than she had in years. The dementia hadn't just been a ruse. The lack of poison in her system had allowed her brain to truly heal. "It's a good day for a new beginning, wouldn't you say, Elena?" she asked, placing the flowers on the mahogany table. "The best," I agreed. I had just returned from my first board meeting as the executive chairwoman. It hadn't been easy. The old guard at Sterling Shipping had tried to intimidate me, thinking I was just a lucky wife who had inherited a seat. But they quickly realized that an architect knows how to find the structural weaknesses in a business plan just as easily as in a building. I had fired 3 directors by lunch. "I heard about the meeting," Martha said, a mischievous glint in her eye. "Arthur told me you used the word restructuring, and 2 of them nearly fainted." "They were skimming, Martha, just like Julian. They thought they could hide it in the fuel surcharges." I sighed, leaning against the banister. It's amazing how people think that because they've been doing something for 20 years, no one will notice when the math stops making sense. "They underestimated you, Elena. It's the greatest mistake a man can make." That evening, I received a letter in the mail. It was a prison communiqué from Julian. I almost threw it away, but my curiosity got the better of me. I opened it and read the frantic, messy scrawl. "Elena, please. It's been 6 months. The food here is literal garbage. My cellmate, he's a monster. He makes me wash his feet every night. I'm dying in here. If you still have any love for me, talk to Martha. Tell her I've learned my lesson. Just get me into a minimum security facility. I'll sign anything. I'll give up the rights to the Hamptons house." I stopped reading. I didn't feel anger. I didn't even feel pity. I just felt bored. I walked over to the fireplace, where a warm blaze was crackling, and I dropped the letter into the flames. I watched as the paper curled and turned to ash, the words love and mercy disappearing into the soot. Julian didn't understand. Justice wasn't about learning a lesson. It was about the consequences of choice. He had chosen to betray his wife. He had chosen to kill his aunt. And now he had to live with the reality he had built for himself. I walked out onto the terrace where Martha was waiting. The sun was setting over the hills, painting the sky in shades of deep violet and burning orange. "Was it from him?" Martha asked, not looking away from the horizon. "It was," I said. And I think it's time we stopped looking back." I picked up my tea, the steam rising in the cool evening air. I felt the weight of the sapphire necklace against my collarbone, a reminder of where I came from and where I was going. The story of the empty house had started with a note of abandonment, but it ended with a foundation of strength. I wasn't just a survivor anymore. I was the architect of a new empire. And for the first time in my life, the house wasn't just a building. It was a home. If you enjoyed this journey of betrayal, high-stakes corporate revenge, and ultimate justice, make sure to hit that like button right now. Stories like Elena's remind us that no matter how dark things get, the truth always finds a way into the light. And karma? Well, karma usually has a very long memory. Share this video with someone who needs to see that staying strong and staying kind can lead to a billionaire's empire. Let's spread the word that the iron matriarchs of the world are watching. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel and turn on that notification bell. We bring you the most intense, heartwarming, and jaw-dropping life stories every single week. You do not want to miss our next deep dive. It involves a hidden inheritance and a secret twin you won't believe. Drop a comment below and let us know. What would you have done if you found that note? Would you have run, or would you have stayed to help Martha? Tell us which city you're watching from and what time it is there. We love seeing how far our community reaches. Check out the 2 stories on your screen right now for more incredible tales of justice and transformation. Just click one, and let's keep the marathon going. Much love to all of you. See you in the next one.